then you'd instruct the students, and then some of the students are missing, so the next day you have to go back over the same thing again, and the next day you have to go back over the same thing again, and then at the end of the year, whether you're sort of getting assignments corrected or handed up or whatever, the same questions keep coming up. So that's where I wanted to figure out some way of me not having to do the work, basically. So by finding augmented reality and finding Arisma, that just done the world of good for me. Okay, so that was the first thing. So when I would have a poster, for example, and it again, just like you've seen before, very well demonstrated, it would show the presentation I had done before, which got me off the hook a little bit. Okay, but then that was the first thing. Another thing then, once I had discovered Arisma, I'm an engineering teacher. I'm working in the design and technology side of the teaching, as well as working with construction and the trades, such as the electrical, the plumbing, and the joinery trade. It's my own trade at the back of it all. So a lot of setting up machines and stuff like that, where you'd have a PowerPoint and a presentation. One of the things with the engineering, one of the level 3 engineering courses we teach, is they have to produce a diagram of a machine, which a diagram shows the individual components of the machine, but then when you actually stand in front of the machine, what you see on the presentation is easy to understand, but it's difficult to relate it to the physical machine. So what I tried to do at the start was to get the students, I broke down whatever teaching materials I had, which was basically a PowerPoint, nothing radical with that, most people sort of use PowerPoint. I broke it down into the individual elements. And what I tried to do first of all was the student would walk down and stand in front of the machine with their own phone or an iPad that I would have given them with reasonably good Wi-Fi connection. Now, the thing about Arisma is one of the downfalls is you're not supposed to use the real world. You're supposed to use a trigger image of the real world. But, you know, when somebody tells you not to do something, you try and do it anyway. So I got the students, and it worked reasonably well. They were interested, they were engaged, they were going down, standing in front of the machine, pointing their phone at the machine itself, and then my PowerPoint would start to, you know, come over the bit of the machine that they were looking at. So for example, obviously I couldn't bring the machine up with me, so what you can see, so, for example, they would walk down, that would have been what they would have seen, the workshop, the machine standing in front of the workshop. Is that okay? And you can just about hear me talking over. Here's a sample of the PowerPoint I would have had, but you can see, if I can just go back for a wee second, if you can sort of get a glimpse at the start of the actual physical machine, looks nothing like the PowerPoint. It sort of relates to it once you know what you're talking about, but it's very difficult to relate the physical with the PowerPoint. So that was the first use I got. Okay. So that was the, what else am I doing now? Okay. The other thing was, I find a lot of the time, my thinking is, when I got to thinking about the automating of the teaching, the technology seems to take over every element that I'm in, you know, not outside teaching, the real world. And people just accept that this is the new thing. So if you're checking in with the doctor, you know what I mean, or a hospital, you just go like a sign in, tells you how many minutes left you see the doctor. If you're standing at a bus stop, tells you how many minutes. So people are gradually accepting this technology, and that's the thing I wanted to sort of bring in. I didn't want to, as a teacher myself, to lose out with the technology. You know, if this modern technology is making everybody else's life easier, then I wanted to use the same thing. Okay, so that was me thinking there. Okay, so that was it. So basically, I used it for the CNC machine and the engineering application. Another thing I done then was what I liked about it was when you have your channel and your image set up, the same trigger image, I can update in the background the content that applies to that trigger image. So that's one thing I liked. You know, so show you here. You may have maybe a lesson plan, maybe, you know, an outline of what you're going to get done that day, and and you can actually stick the same, now it doesn't have to be me, obviously, but you can stick the same trigger image in the classroom. When the student will walk up then, okay, it basically starts explaining what the next lesson is going to be. Now each time I would launch that, or every lesson, basically I would sort of re-trigger, and you can set timers on it for what appears on the lesson itself. So that was another little tweak to say, okay? And to be honest with you, it was, if I stood in front of the class and tell them what they were going to do today, they probably wouldn't listen to me at the start of the class. You know, they're talking about what was going on the weekend and everything else. But when there's something like that there, and they know that poster's in the workshop or in the classroom, then it's another way of getting them to learn what do we do today. So there's another sort of introduction for me to it. So a couple of different things then I went through, right? So once I had sort of experimented with it myself, then a lot of other colleagues of mine was interested in doing it as well. And what's the story of this augmented reality? The good thing about augmented reality is I think the term itself, augmented reality, seems to sound cool. Okay, so a lot of people is very interested. But I think from the survey we done at the very start, people sort of said that it must be very difficult to do. And that's the thing that surprised me. You'd get a trigger image, and I only reused PowerPoints and video content that was already available. And all the app does is launch it for you. That was it. Now trying to tell some teachers that works with me that that's all there's to it, they're going, it can't be. It's augmented reality. It has to be something different than that. No, that was it. So that was quite a good thing. Okay, so other areas then. So working in the trades. A lot of the electrical and the plumbing tutors that I'm talking to as well and dealing with may have the likes of a schematic like that there. Okay, now some of the students themselves, they'd see the plan of what they have to do. Okay, now it may be a plumbing diagram like this here, or it may be an electrical diagram. Now I don't know if you're familiar with some of the trade areas, you'll see these booths, basically 8 foot high, 8x4 sheets, and then you have to sort of wire in wires around them, plumb in certain types of situations. Okay, the likes, if you can see it down here, the likes of that exercise down here on the floor. Now the only thing was, Christopher Robinson was working with me at this, he says the students, they're great, they can do the work, but they don't know where to start the work. They can read the drawing, but sometimes they just don't know where, what do we screw on the wall first here? What do I mark first? Where do I start? Where do I start this corner, the top corner? Where is it you want the thing positioned? And they don't know. So Christopher, no more than myself, he was explaining the same thing every single time to all the students. So now the students can walk up, basically, point their device at it. Point their device at the poster. And basically starts to launch in a second the basic steps that they needed to complete the practical piece. Now this is a very simple example. The reason I brought it with me is because you can kind of see the reality of the thing. But the good thing is, when Christopher then stuck a poster on the wall, we could augment around the 3 walls. So even a very complicated piece around the 3 walls was sort of easy to understand where the student needs to get going, where the student needs to start. And they can see the finished article at the end. Okay? So if you can imagine the poster on the wall, the student walking around, and he or she then can see where all the actual physical components goes at the end. So that was kind of successful. We've done the same for the electrical. Okay? Now, what else do we do? Right. Yep, well the next thing then, 2 more basically, and I'll finish up then. We had the end of year design show as well. So one of the other applications that I done was the students, some of the art students would have a nice piece of artwork. But when somebody would walk in, they didn't know what the art piece was about. So actually capturing the student on video talking about their influences and what the project was about, and what the class they were in and all the rest. That worked well, and the art and design teacher worked well with that. You can see something similar, if I can point it here. You see the student actually talking about their project. So I'm sure you get the idea.
Great morning, contemporary design and manufacture. I think the easy formers, just a simple child draw design. Just think the
it works. The two ladies previously explained it very well. That's where I used it. I used it, like I say, the construction trades. I think there's great applications for applying the practical to the real world. I did go to the car mechanic, the automotive section. One of the sections was where they can take a simple poster that they have, and then the poster breaks down into the individual components, and then that man was explaining to it. I done that roughly just to show your man from the car mechanic and what the crack was. He was happy enough. And then I says, right, we'll go all out here, and I'm not sure if you're these mobile boards that has headlight displays and combustion engine displays and all the rest, the actual physical things. I walked down and set one up for one that had headlights in it and stuff like that. Basically, on top of all the headlights, explained all the bits and pieces, the alternators and all the starters and all the switches and all, how it all worked. Showed it, went back to the mechanic then and showed it to him, and he says, well, sure, in fairness, if the students didn't know that anyway, they wouldn't be in the class. So sometimes, I got a bit too far along with my technology and it didn't work out. Okay, some of the problems I had, just to finish up, some of the times a lot of reflective surfaces, such as the laminating, I found that could be a bother if the light is shining on it. It was a big problem with the art and design because they had their portraits inside picture frames with glass on the front, so that was a problem. The 2D and the 3D thing, yes, it works well with the trigger image, but it can work with the 3D physical world, but it doesn't work as well. Another thing was the connectivity. I hadn't got Wi-Fi when I started doing it in the workshop. It just wouldn't connect for me. It was the way the workshop was made. But the students were able to go down with their own phones and just use the network themselves. And they were more than willing to do it. I says to them, just try it out for crack if you want. And they were more than willing because it was something new. So that kind of, at the very start, sort of sparked off something for me as well. That's as much as I have, folks. Basically, at the minute, I think we're just at the key moment of change. All these apps and everything else seems to be changing. Like I said, technology, I feel, is crossing a lot of different boundaries, and I don't want to lose out myself. If it's going to make my job as a teacher a lot easier, then I'm all for it. That's right.
I'd just like to extend our thanks to Anya and Paul, because both of them volunteered to take part in the project for us, so this was extra work for them. I'd just like to thank them very much they've obviously put in a lot of hard work too. So thanks very much for that. Sorry about your technical problems.
Does anyone have any questions for Paul just before he gets comfortable? No?
I was really just a comment that if you're trying to use the Erasmus app, I think your comment about when you get the reflections and all that, the image that you use needs to be reasonably detailed. I think that's when it works, and you're probably using those for that there. But also, if you sort of tilt I only learned this yesterday, if you tilt your device at a slight angle, when you're over the image, you get a better, it also picks up more detail that way, and it works more effectively then. So if you're ever not getting the signal coming through, that kind of tilting can help as well.
Thanks, Kay. That's interesting. The other nice thing about seeing Anya's work and Paul's work is that they've never done anything with AR before, and they only started this in April. So you can see what they've achieved. Some very impressive stuff there.